We are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:04 on July 21st, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission. If the Spanish language interpreters, Gabriela and Thalia, can please get the information on Spanish language interpretation now, that would be wonderful.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Esta es una reunión de la Policía de Accountabilidad. Hoy día es 21 de julio y vamos a empezar una reunión pública y vamos a tener acceso a interpretación en el idioma de su preferencia, en español.
Thank you so very much. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Ashley and Aaron. You can pin their video feed if that is helpful to you. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note that this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon State law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings and agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. Next slide, please. We offer this land acknowledgement this evening to the Chinook, the Clatskanie, the Kalapuya tribal nations who have stewarded this land for generations. We call attention to the Multnomah Chinook and the Clackamas Chinook, who are not on this map, but are part of the history, the vibrant history of this area. These tribal nations are now part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and this is the land upon which we reside. We respectfully acknowledge the contributions and the stewarding of the land of the elders, both past and present and future. Thank you. I will pass it over to the co-chairs to discuss. Oh, no, I won't. I am going to go to the community agreements. So we have here on our screen the community agreements. I invite all of us to read the agreements at our pace. And then after the second page of the agreements, I will ask for a thumbs up and a recognition of the agreements. May I please have a thumbs up to the agreements? Thank you very much. Now I would like to pass it over to the co-chairs of the commission of the fact-finding phase to take us through the schedule.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Moses. My name is Faith Aiken. I am one of 3 co-chairs for the fact-finding phase. Aimide, would you please move to the next slide? So just a moment to go over our schedule and timeline. The commission is currently in the fact-finding phase of our work, which is expected to go into August. We are hearing from key stakeholders, identifying barriers to police accountability in Portland presently, and examining systems of accountability from other jurisdictions. Future phases of our work will develop the parameters for the new police accountability system before the commission presents to City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. Slide 7, please. Following today's meeting, here are the next several upcoming meetings of the commission. The Subcommittee on Research is upcoming, meeting on July 25th, followed by July 28th. We will hear from Portland Police Association and City Commissioner Ryan. August 1st, we have a subcommittee meeting on research. August 4th, a work session on our areas of agreement. And I will not read the rest. Let's move to the next slide, please. So to orient where we are in our project plan, you can see us here in the purple outline with yellow highlights. This evening, we are hearing from Commissioner Carmen Rubio. Welcome, Commissioner Rubio. We are also hearing from AMAC at 8 p.m. this evening. Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform, which is an amicus to the U.S. Department of Justice versus City of Portland settlement agreement. So that's where we are this evening. You can see and orient yourself. Here we are in July, and as I said, in August, we will be completing the areas of agreement and transitioning into the next phase of work.
Thank you so much. Would you like to continue with the rest of the slide?
I would love to.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, we're hearing from Commissioner Carmen Rubio this evening. We will have an opportunity for questions from members of the commission. We will have an opportunity for public comment to ask questions for Commissioner Rubio. We will also be discussing and identifying barriers and best practices that have been identified. As I mentioned, we will be moving into the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform, or AMAC, their presentation at around 8 p.m. We will have a very similar model in which PAC members will have an opportunity to ask questions and public comment to ask questions of AMAC. We will also have a general public comment time, and we will be discussing among us the barriers and best practices identified in tonight's conversation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Faith. Now we would like to introduce Commissioner Carmen Rubio. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Moses and Faith, and all the commissioners who are here tonight. I want to thank you for reaching out to our office and letting me have an opportunity to connect with you in your work. I also want to share that my policy director, Ricardo Lujan Valerio, is also with us tonight. He is on the phone, but he is listening in. He also has extensive experience in this policy area and in my office. This is squarely within his portfolio, public safety and community safety. So if there's any other more substantive policy questions, he's also here to help dig deeper if there are any questions there. And for those of you who may not know me, I'm Commissioner Rubio. I took office about a year and a half ago. And just to give some context, this is my first term in City Hall. And previous to this role, I was the executive director at Latino Network for 11 years. And it's, many of you may know Latino Network. For those of you who don't, it's one of Oregon's largest direct service and advocacy organizations for the Latinx, Latina community in Oregon, but primarily in the metro area. And during that time, when I was in that role, we worked very closely with many stakeholders, including those that intersected directly around public safety issues. And also in our program at that time, we had a program called we actually have a long history actually of engaging around police community issues with our community, also as it intersects with a lot of the programming that we did with young people and people who were young people adjudicated, as well as families and immigrant families who were experiencing issues of trust and targeting by police. And so we have had different iterations of different programs over the years, even preceding my time with Latino Network. But most recently, we had a program called Community Healing Initiative, or CHI, which worked with the families and youth who were adjudicated and re-entering into community. So we intersected quite a bit in that way. And throughout that process, we heard a lot from community about the impact and interactions with law enforcement. And so the necessity of change and reform and ultimately transformation has really been a pillar for us in that program, and helped shape my lens given that experience. And so the events that happened in 2020 only amplified the need, and also our advocacy there to seek that change. And so when the ballot measure to create this accountability board came to fruition, our C4 became our primary financial home. And as a director and board member for the C4, we were very proud to do that and have that connection and be that support for the campaign. So we were intimately invested in ensuring its passage from an operations perspective, and also from our advocacy, and Rico was very involved, as was our other staff, Anthony at the time. And we were glad to see the overwhelming support that the community came forward to pass. And so we're now at a place and time to implement the body of work, and we must show and execute that promise that we made to community to do so. So before I start getting into some of the questions that I wanted that you've sent to me to respond to, I did want to just make sure to give each and every one of you a big appreciation for participating in this body. This is truly a huge mandate, and there are so many stakeholders invested and interested in seeing how this work comes out. And I know that your work represents hours and hours and hours of deliberation. And I feel like our city is very fortunate that we have interested and dedicated community members who care very much about seeing this work through. So I just wanted to say that. And our office will try to be as helpful and resourceful as we can be in your work. So our doors are always open if there's anything that we can do to support the work that you're doing. So now, should I just go on to the questions that you sent me? Okay, great. So first question regarding the barriers to police accountability in the current system. So my lens of the current barriers are pretty broad, and given that I don't oversee any city entity that specifically holds accountability. We have accountability as the city council commission. But that being said, so I don't know the ins and outs specifically, but that being said, I feel like I can identify two areas. What my question back to you maybe at the end was, I don't know in your research where these two areas that I identified might fit into your framework that you're developing, but it's important just to say what they are to you. And I'm sure, and they're very connected. So I'm sure that definitely there will be intersecting at some way, but some things also are systemic. The first barrier I recognize is obviously one that you've probably heard over and over again, but the need for community transparency and communication. And you know, I think it's also fair to say that most of these conversations have been centered on instances where force is used. But I also think some of the most impactful interactions also happen when force isn't used, but when civil rights violations are infringed. And I think that's a very important space to also capture as well, because when these incidents happen in the event that they're reported, there's very little information given to community and follow-up, especially the impacted community, of what's happening, you know, what and then what happens after, or where did that information go. So that is a critical place, I think that is worth looking at. And also, you know, as a longtime manager, I'm not saying that always in every instance, like you know, to share all the details of investigation. I get that from an HR perspective and about maintaining the integrity of any kind of process, but there does need to be that continuing communication, updates, so that people can expect and trust that a process is happening and know the components of those processes to the extent that information is available and should be shared when it's appropriate. The second barrier is the actual accountability tools that are available or not yet available within the whole system. And I'll use the current example about the conversations we're having around body-worn cameras. I believe that body-worn cameras can be a tool to inform and display a limited objective lens of an incident. And the body-worn camera program, however, doesn't change the accountability consequences for officers based on an action or behavior. That is wholly depends on the applicable laws and policies. So there's an interplay there between the policy and the actual tool. And so I'm glad on one hand that we're able to move forward the dial or move the dial forward on the discipline matrix that we recently, you know, were able to get, but our laws are still mostly unchanged on the tools for someone like the DA to prosecute. And, you know, and I know less about that area. Rico knows more, but there's an interplay about policy and then also the tool. And this is why, and this is where I believe that other decision makers at multiple levels will also have to buy in to the needed change around policing in this area, so that we have a holistic ecosystem that actually results in the changes that we want. And then regarding the questions about best practices in the current police accountability system, admittedly, I'm not, you know, intimately involved in overseeing this work, but still, it is very difficult to understand what is and isn't working. We haven't had a lot of transparency in this area. Our office has had a few meetings with the IPR director, Ross Creswell, and those meetings have been very informative about the challenges they even have faced as employees that try to hold individuals accountable. But it was also clear from them that they were also very limited in their tools that they had as well. So if I were to share my thoughts on this, it would be that the current system we should really, you know, there are some learnings about the operational and administrative benefits that will enable this body not to entirely have to relearn from other learnings. There are some things that we can like learn from what didn't work last time, you know, and or what pieces, what insights do they have about what things could have worked better had we had X, Y, or Z. So I think those are important things to recognize as well that we could take. So we're not recreating that wheel or having to redo that research that we can easily get from there. And then also Rico can speak to this, but my staff has also indicated that there seems to be different levels of accountability regarding civil and criminal. I know less about that specific thing, and that's maybe something Rico can speak to. And then finally, my desired goals for what the system should look like. Well, again, I just want to honor that you are all doing the real work and the research. So I really look forward to see how how your analysis and your framework for this develop. But a couple of things I would love to see is first, a body or entity that is well staffed and resourced with professionals that have experience in investigations and as or in analysis. I think it is important to have some experience pertaining to misconduct of police officers or any other kind of public safety entity. I think that expertise is very different from HR kind of management. So I feel like we would need to know what to look for. And it's also important that, at the same time that the board is comprised of impacted individuals and community members so that we can provide that very real lived experience guidance as well. We need both those components. And it's also true that this work is delicately navigated given the federal, state, and other external barriers that are there. So maybe some knowledge about that, like what are like the different levels and jurisdictions and how they intersect with this kind of work in this body in this local jurisdiction. And also just having the right, or actually the really effective and responsive professional team to help really support the board. This is going to be a lot of dense work. And just having been, being a commissioner who over the planning and sustainability that has the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and then also over PSEF that has a PSEF committee. It is very, very dense work. And I'm seeing the hours and hours of work it takes for the body to get the members to get through a lot of the critical work, and how even turnover on the seats or the challenges of attendance can really impact how fast or slow the work goes. So having those critical a really well-equipped and well-staffed body or commission staff, I think would be very important. And it would be a very important way to support and honor the volunteer hours that the commissioners are going to give to maximize them. And then also, I want to ensure, the second thing would be to ensure that there's real and meaningful and authentic collaboration and transparency among this body, and then also the impacted community members. I think that that's, obviously you all know, that's one of the big criticisms that we had from before, where there was just, there wasn't that relationship. And again, no one should have to wait months to receive word from the city about what the progress of their complaint is. I'm hoping, or what I would want to see, is that the body would ensure that the right systems are in place to make sure that that regular communication and regular in-person touch, that you can actually pick up the phone and talk to somebody and have respectful and meaningful conversations and get the information to feel like someone is really paying attention to your issue or your complaint as it moves through the process. So those are just my thoughts on this. And also, I don't know if it's appropriate with you, if it's okay to introduce Rico to answer anything else. Rico, I don't know if you want to say hello, but yeah, we're here to answer any questions as well. And again, just want to say thank you again for all this really important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Yes, it's fine for Rico to step in. We'd love to welcome him in.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. I also want to just thank you all for the work that you all are doing. And just to reiterate some of Commissioner Rubio's kind of points, I think it's pretty critical that we're able to kind of learn from the past and move forward with a system that, again, in some areas, we won't necessarily have to recreate the wheel. I think there's some administrative procedural aspects that have been very helpful, will continue to be helpful, but it's no secret or surprise to you all that there are a lot of barriers within the city of Portland as it relates even to relationships from office to bureaus that limit the ability and the timeliness for entities like IPR or any oversight body to really get information and assess a complaint on a timely manner. So I do want to really put an emphasis on Commissioner Rubio's point about kind of some of the external barriers that we continue to see and will continue to face. And so as I kind of digest the work that you all are doing and what will be presented to us, one additional aspect that I think will be important is if you do all still identify things that need to be changed at the state level, things that would need to be changed even at a county level so that our partners in the county level can also continue to move forward with us, that'll be very important so that we can have a true multi-jurisdictional lens into the work that needs to happen. So again, I appreciate you all for having us here. And as the commissioner stated, if there are any questions that we can be helpful with, I'll be here.
Thank you so much. We'll now take questions and let Commissioner Rubio respond to them. And for Rico to respond to them, please keep your questions brief. Please allow me to facilitate the Q&A, and please ask questions that help the commission move towards identifying barriers to police accountability and best practices, which is the purpose of this phase of work. So I invite commissioners to raise their hands and jump into a conversation. Commissioner Faith.
Thank you. Thanks, that's helpful. It's really always interesting to hear from City Council on perceptions of barriers. And one thing that we're tasked with is bringing forward a recommendation to City Council and then hopefully have it approved. And so you spoke to it a little bit, but I'm curious of what you need to see from us for a yes from you and your office. And also you mentioned a little bit around the buy-in from PPB or people who will actually be held accountable, and what kind of, I'm curious around your thoughts of how we develop a system that is tenable, but also that the community views as just and not just rubber stamped by PPB. So like, how do we hold the tension between sometimes those diverse opinions?
So I'm going to defer to Rico on this because he's been really deep diving on this and is part of these conversations. Rico?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. So to the first part of it, I think for us, we would be really interested to see your final findings in terms of kind of a broad assessment of what you've seen in a national lens or even regional lens of best practices, right? I think that a lot of innovative oversight entities have been created in other jurisdictions, even outside of Oregon. And if that's the length of scope that you've all been navigating and trying to learn from those other entities and how it could be applicable here in Portland, would love to continue to learn with you all about what that means. And then through that, seeing a proposal from this body, recommendations of what the actual structures would look like. What are some of the procedural aspects that this body would be governed under? Commissioner Rubio mentioned about the need for professional staff and for experts to really be able to resource this body. Many of you know that a lot of this work is very sensitive and multi-dynamic and can easily become appealed in multiple levels, even through litigation. So how are we ensuring that this body is resourced in a way that can be defensible in those spaces, right? And so having a holistic plan that really outlines those things with justifications of again, other bodies that might be exploring the same things that you all are, will be really critical and really helpful for us to be able to make this next iteration of police accountability. In terms to your second question about relationship, coalition building, kind of our approach to a multi-jurisdictional, not necessarily getting the rubber stamp or stamp of approval by PPB, right? At the end of the day, you're creating an entity that holds accountable law enforcement officers, that holds accountable an agency that is given this awesome responsibility with the ability to use a significant amount of force, but rather how are we working with other partners? Because there's this balance that this body will have to really deal with in terms of when an incident happens, and there might be a criminal component to it. It might be a fully just solely civil HR issue on it. And those things will be very delicate to try to navigate and assess how to proceed with. So with that in mind, and knowing that when things do become criminal, that means that there will be some level of collaboration or some nexus to the district attorney's office, right? How can we at this early stage, and certainly when you all give recommendations, what are some of the guidances that you would give us as council to hold those conversations with the county, to hold those conversations with the district attorney's office? And moreover, again, if there's specific state statute that's prohibitive to this body to continue to do its work in a true sense, or could increase the flexibility of the work of this body, we have a great government relations team, and our job in City Hall is to really work closely with them to solve those issues in Salem. So again, looking to you all to see how are those state relationships and those state potential barriers be addressed within that space. So hopefully that answers both of those questions.
And just to piggyback on, thank you, Rico, for jumping in. And you mentioned, or part of your question was, how can this commission get to a yes on your proposal from City Council? I think, and maybe I'm speaking for myself in my year and a half now in on the council, and what kind of information I need to make a good assessment. What I would suggest or what I would offer is that it would be very helpful before you get to the final stages, but when you're getting to some critical decision points about going this way or this way or this way, or if you have different scenarios that you're encountering, to maybe at that point recheck in with council members one-on-one, so that you can just get their quick, like, or maybe not even quick, but just their reactions to what you're presenting them. If anything, I'm not saying so that it changes, but more it's going to give you an idea of where people's heads are around that. And that, I think, can help you just know how to navigate, or at least know what to expect, from in terms of concerns or interests or support. I think for me, speaking just experientially in this last year and a half, I think that having something to react to, like actually being able to see something and to see where your ideas are and your thinking helps me have better questions for you, rather than just asking a question but not knowing where you're putting that meat on the bone and how you're all seeing it structured. It helps us to see how you might have that structure in your mind, or how you're thinking and what it will address. And I think that probably just goes back to, I'm a very visual learner, and that helps me kind of see the picture of that framework.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. Commissioner Dan.
Yes, good evening. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a commissioner. I'm Commissioner Rubio. I just saw you yesterday morning, as my role is Portland Cop Watch, but I'm speaking tonight from the commission. We are dealing with the issue of this new board is going to have the right to discipline the officers directly. And I just read the Department of Justice's report about the last year and a half in the Portland Police Bureau, and discovered that 7 officers who were found guilty of misconduct had their records purged voluntarily by the city. It didn't explain what the allegations were that were found out of policy. The DOJ indicated that they were appropriately found out of policy. I don't understand why that happened. And right now, we may be changing the system of government by the time this new board goes in place. But my question to you is, especially because the city council right now sits as the final appeal stop in the current system, when the Citizen Review Committee brings an appeal to you, do you see a role for city council to make sure that decisions made by this board are enforced the way that the board asks for them to be? That is to say that if they impose discipline on an officer, that will hold.
Are you talking about if it's appealed or if it's in litigation, or just as a part of the process itself?
Oh, I'm just saying that if the board finds misconduct and imposes discipline, do you see a role for the city council to step in case something gets done behind the scenes, like we don't know what happened with these 7 cases, where somebody's trying to overturn that discipline, where the city council can play a role to make sure that the board's supported in the decisions they make?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And I can see both sides of that. I could see how, on one hand, yes, you'd want to have council have a role to address anything that happened, just as you expressed. And on the other side, you wouldn't want council meddling as well. If you happen to have a different composition of council members, to sort of do the same thing, but from that side. So I guess to me, it depend on what the structure of the body ends up being. And then if there are specific roles that are outlined in specific but very limited and roles that council plays. So as a fail safe or as a safeguard, right? So maybe, but if it's very clear and specific, I don't know. Rico, do you have any thoughts on this? It's a good question to think about.
Yes, Commissioner. I think it is a difficult one, given that the council serves as a quasi-judicial body for a multitude of purposes, and not one quasi-judicial process is the same as the other. I think the commissioner's right on when she says that there needs to be a clear outline process should there be a need for council to play a role in this. And again, because of the political nature of an elected city council, it would be tricky to find those decision-making processes ultimately lie within that body. I would say, Dan, that probably lands to the point of how can we continue to make this body the strongest it can be so that it doesn't need to have that kind of justification by a council at the end of the day, right? And so really outlining that in your report back to the council, your final recommendation will be important. Assessing what other bodies have done that works best in that dynamic. And again, what changes need to happen at any level really to make that come to fruition.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Commissioner Dan.
Just as a quick follow-up, I didn't want to make my question too long, but the language in the charter that was put in by the voters says that the new board can recommend policy changes to the police bureau, and if the police bureau rejects those policy changes, then the board will send that to city council, who gets to vote on it. And if they vote yes, the bureau has to follow the policy change. So I sort of see that there may be a parallel possibility if something happens with the discipline process. That's just kind of what I'm.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Commissioner Dan. Go ahead, Commissioner Rubio.
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you for that information. I wasn't aware of that.
Thank you so much. Any more questions? Again, thinking about our barriers, thinking about our best practices. Commissioner Catherine.
Good evening, Catherine McDowell. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for being here tonight, Commissioner Rubio. And I just had I wasn't sure I followed your second point on the discussion around the importance of connecting policies and tools. So, and how that then comes back to what we're doing. So you talked a little bit about the importance of the disciplinary matrix. I think, were you just saying like it's really important that you were able to develop that disciplinary matrix, but now you need a system in which it is fairly administered? Is that
I think that's what I was saying, that having the tool that in some instances it's enough, but in some others it doesn't, where there are other jurisdictions that have that can't fully realize the intention of that tool. For example, with what we were talking about the matrix, it still depends on the DA's role to then carry that forward. So it's just, I guess it's really about, we need to have those strong relationships with other jurisdictions and other parts of this accountability ecosystem, or the safety ecosystem, so that there's alignment around the direction and the intent that you want to go. Some things can be, codified or passed in policy or through IGA, and other things aren't. But just kind of having an awareness of making sure that when you do create a tool that you want to use, making sure that you do have those conversations with the other jurisdictions, so that there's alignment or agreement, and that you're not caught short and you can't really fulfill the full intentionality of what you're trying to do. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. You're talking about other jurisdictions that play a role here, like the DA's
Yes,
office,
yeah,
or PPB, or the council, or whatever existing, there is a current ecosystem that we are looking at sort of top to bottom,
yeah,
seeing
yeah.
what gets replaced. So
Yeah, and the closer example too about the body worn cameras is really, that's just really truly a benign tool. It really depends on the policies that you pass and how we're all using, and employing it, and what are the parameters. And so yeah, it's both of those things.
yeah, I would say, just to give you a little bit of feedback that ties into that a little bit, is that almost every person who's spoken to us has identified a barrier as like the complexity of the system, the challenges of understanding it, of navigating it, of people being able to understand it. So, that, I guess what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think the challenge is that the current system is pretty complex. So understanding all of those relationships is one of our, certainly one of our goals right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Catherine. We have time for one more question before we go to public comment. Any other questions? All right, then I am going to move forward, and we will now take public comment on the issues discussed in this particular briefing. We ask members of the public to keep their comments on the briefing or questions to the briefers to 2 minutes in length at most, and raise their hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. I'll be glad to call on people when in whatever order is preferred, but in making sure that everyone gets to speak once. Are there any people in the audience who would like to speak during this public comment for Commissioner Rubio? I am not seeing anyone raise their hand to speak. And so I think we can spend a little bit of time. Thank you so much. I think we can spend a little bit of time as a commission talking about and reaffirming the barriers and the best practices. I do want to thank Commissioner Rubio and Rico. Before we hop into discussion, I want to thank you for your time and your expertise, and for really helping us think deeply about where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And if we, again, our doors are open, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to connect with you, and big appreciation to what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, folks.
All right, Commission, would you like to have a brief conversation here? Again, reaffirming either the barriers or the best practices.
Yeah, just to start us off, I took a little bit of notes from what Commissioner Rubio brought up today. So she identified a couple of barriers. Thank you, Commissioner Catherine, for emphasizing that this is one we're hearing a lot around the need for transparency and a feedback loop with community, and clarifying that the current accountability tools that are in place aren't being fully utilized, or they're not being utilized well. Curious for other folks if they heard other barriers, or if the ones she identified resonated with you.
I think Commissioner Catherine has her hand up.
Should I?
I'm on mute. I'm so sorry. I'm saying your name and
Yeah, well, it happens.
No. Commissioner
Even-
Catherine, please.
Yeah, thank you. Even those of us who spend our lives on this medium mess up from time to time. I get that. So I guess my feedback was really just, I think Commissioner Rubio, more than any other, one of the commissioners alluded to the interplay with the DA's office and the challenges particularly associated with accountability when it gets into criminal issues. Certainly, we have heard some discussion about the care that needs to be taken in separating administrative and criminal processes, but I just wondered, maybe that is an area, maybe, I don't know if we have a briefing with the DA scheduled, but it just seemed like maybe that's a follow-up, because that seemed like a barrier that Commissioner Rubio was flagging.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Catherine. Commissioner Dan.
Yeah, I think I heard both Commissioner Rubio and her aide, who I know is Rico. I know I try to stay professional around here, but I can't remember his title. That we need to think about laws on the county or state level that might be affecting the ability of this board to do its work, and that's kind of at the base of a lot of the questions I've asked to almost every one of our guests is, can this board even do what it says it's going to do the way it's written? And so just kind of getting back to the point I was making about the current charter and the way the city council interacts with that. We heard a little bit about the city council being at the tail end of the current appeals process. And Commissioner Rubio sat on a hearing last year where there's a person whose car was towed, and the Citizen Review Committee recommended a sustained fine against the officer for not filing a report about the car being towed, which resulted in her losing the car. And all 4 members of the city council who sat in on that appeal voted in favor of that. And to this day, even though I follow this stuff very closely, I have no idea whether that officer actually got disciplined for that, because there's so little transparency. And I don't know if that has to do with state laws or employment laws or collective bargaining, or whether that finding, as I sort of hinted at, might have been overturned as one of those 7 that got overturned. And I just want to, her discussion about transparency kind of ties into questions about these laws. So.
Thank you for that clarity, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Debbie will be our last commenter in this section.
So I just was thinking about the role of city council, if there's, if we decide to build that into our system. And I sort of feel like that's one of the strengths of the system that we have, because I getting these appeals out in the public and hearing all the discussions and understanding the process better, just because it's way more high profile when it's going to city council than it is when it's at a citizen review committee meeting. But on the other hand, I'm on the research subcommittee and research Denver and Oakland. And I get them all scrambled unless I have the piece of paper in my hand, but I'm pretty sure it's Oakland. I think it was interesting because they write in their policies, they can form a discipline committee of the police commission that's made up of community volunteers. And it says right in their thing, they get to make the final decision, and the city administrator and the mayor cannot change it. And I mean, then there are appeals processes like the civil service board, that kind of thing. But within the structure of Oakland City's government, that's the end. And so in some ways, I think, well, maybe that's a stronger system then, is to have the community board be the final say, setting aside, again, civil service appeals and stuff. So I don't know, just kicking this around in my head. I don't have the answer. I just was comparing. I like what we have in Portland in some ways, and I also thought that made a lot of sense too. So, okay, thanks. That's it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Debbie. We will now take a break for 10 minutes. We will come back at 8:05. So please, we will take a break and return at 8:05. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening. We're going to move into the next part of our meeting, which is a briefing with the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition. Dr. Leroy Haynes and Reverend Dr. Mark Knutson and Ashley Albies, you all have the floor now.
Yes. First of all, to the distinguished members of the Police Accountability Commission, I come today with Dr. Mark Knudsen and Ashley Abbott to just present some context for you on what's historically and presently that is happening. First of all, I want to state, I use he and she pronoun. The Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform is a coalition that has consistently advocated for police reform in the Portland Police Bureau and justice in the criminal justice system for the last 2 decades. The Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition was formed out of 25 coalition partners some 20 years ago in response to the killing of an unarmed African-American female by the name of Kendra James in 2003. And it was in this context that over 5,000 members of the Portland community of diverse faith, ages, and races united together to call for justice. It was a time that many community leaders, community organizations, labor, faith houses, activists felt a need to create a broad-based grassroots coalition to address the issue of police using excessive and deadly force unjustly against members of the Portland community. The Albina Ministerial Coalition focused on 5 major goals, which included: 1, we called for a federal investigation by the Justice Department to include criminal and civil rights violations. But even beyond that, we called for a federal audit, an audit of the total patterns and practices of the Portland Police Bureau. 2, we called for creating an independent police review board and the Citizen Review Committee with the goal of adding the power to compel testimony from police officers. 3, we called for a full review of the Bureau excessive and deadly force policy and training with diverse citizen participation for the purpose of making recommendations to change policies and training. 4, we called to lobby the state legislature to narrow the language of the state statute for the use of deadly force by police officers. And 5, which we are still working on, we called for a special prosecutor for all excessive and deadly force cases. The Albana Ministerial Coalition was either the lead advocate or supportive advocate in a variety of excessive force case, or deadly force case, from Jahar Perez Jr. in 2004, James Chassie in 2006, 12-year-old girl Beanbag and Trimat in 2009, the Aaron Campbell case in 2010, the Keaton Oldies case in 2010, and many others. It was, though, in particular, following the killing of an unarmed African-American male in distress, the death of his brother, that Aaron Campbell was killed by a Portland police sniper, Fresh Hour, in January 29, 2010. There was mass demonstrations that broke out different communities throughout the city of Portland, and both the Albana Minister Alliance Coalition and City Council member and Mayor Sam Adams called for a federal investigation of the Aaron Campbell case. But the Albana Minister Alliance Coalition stepped further in calling for a federal audit of all the shootings that were coming. We sent a request to the Department of Justice with the endorsement of the 2 Oregon senators asking for a federal audit of the Portland Police Bureau patterns and practices in the use of excessive and deadly force against communities of color in particular and citizens of the Portland. Later, Mayor Sam Adams and Commissioner Dan Salzman endorsed the call for an audit of the Portland Police Bureau. In the spring of 2011, the Department of Justice came back with a report at the Campbell case stating that it found no wrongdoing by the Portland police officer. However, in June the 8th in 2011, the Department of Justice announced it would conduct an audit of patterns and practices of the Portland Police Bureau. During the summer of 2011, the Department of Justice started interviews of community members as well as the Portland Police Bureau, community organizations, lawyers, and city officials. On September the 13th, 2012, the Department of Justice issued a letter of finding saying patterns and practices of excessive force is used against people with mental illness are perceived to be mentally ill. In November of 2012, the City Council passed an amended settlement agreement. In January of 2013, Judge Michael Simon allowed the Police Bureau Association to be a part of the lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice and created a new status of legal precedence for the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition called Enhanced Amicus, which allowed the coalition as a community organization to be a limited party in the mediation of the settlement agreement. In July 2013, the City Council accepted the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition Collaborative Agreement outlining the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition participation in the implementation of the settlement agreement. In February of 2014, Judge Simon conducted a fairness hearing where over 70 persons gave testimony from all walks of life. In August 2014, Judge Michael Simon entered the settlement agreement into record and called for an annual periodic hearing. In October 2014, the City Council announced its intention to appeal the periodic annual hearing. Now, when we get to the issue of police accountability, there's a double standard in our city, state, and nation when it comes to holding police accountable for unnecessary use of force or excessive force. And the standard applied to the average citizens in Portland, in particular the Black, brown, and mentally ill person. The overwhelming citizens of Portland see the police as a necessary part of creating a peaceful, orderly, and just society. But what they don't want is police officers using their authority and force to unjustly and unjustifiable and unnecessary using deadly force and excessive force against citizens and persons in Portland, whether they are Black, brown, white, or mentally ill. Historically and presently, we still struggle with the issue of racism, racial bias, gender bias, and mistreatment of mentally ill persons or those perceived to be mentally ill. This commission has been birthed to speak truthfully in blood, sweat, and tears, to be an agent to bring fairness and justice and equality to police accountability, to do justice towards all of the citizens as well as police officers. And this commission is not a panacea in solving all of the police and community problems. But I can say this truly, it is an essential structure for rebuilding trust between the various communities and the Portland Police Bureau. Now, in the area of barriers, there is what we call them versus us. It's a cultural context within the Portland Police Bureau. And we have to speak to that culture and transform that culture. Police versus the Black and brown and mentally ill community. An example of this was the concept of police officers as warriors versus the community. But a more positive concept would be guardians versus none as one community. Then we find that there's a blue wall of silence among police officers that is a barrier, even though often they say that gang members should not be confined and should be willing to testify against each other. Then we find that training policies and directives must be incongruent with each other. What we have found over the year through the arbitration system is that many times the policy and training conflict with each other, and the officer get off without any accountability. Fifth, we find that there's no prosecution of police officers for killing unarmed citizens. In fact, the Dallas County grand jury has a 100% record for never prosecuting a police officer for killing a Black or brown mentally ill citizen. Six, the mechanism of dealing with police intimidation. You won't hear this from any other body, but there is police intimidation when you start investigating them. And then seven, we have to deal with the legal thing of the arbitration system that has over and over again, police officers that have been held accountable have been put back on the job. Now, the commission needs certain things as we've gone through the history of this with precept, predecessor, and others. It is critically important that the commission has essential staff. It is critically important that they have their own legal advisor separate from the city attorney. It's critically important for transparency as much as possible with state laws. Training of the commissioners and retreats by the commission are critically important. The ability to acquire information from areas within the city is critically important. Deliberations should always be fair, just, and equal. And then accessibility to the community should always be open, and accessibility to the police bureau. And those are some of my points. And I know Dr. Knudsen has something to say about culture. Dr. Knudsen.
Dr. Haynes, always thank you. We've been running mates for about 27 years now, and your leadership is so invaluable. So to the Police Accountability Commission, thank you for your service. It takes a lot of time and effort to do the work you're doing. It's vital work, and we so appreciate it because you're going to take us the next step. But I think it's important to say that Dr. Haynes and I were both part of the campaign team that got that measure, the city measure passed to establish this process because this work has been so important to us. I can go back years on this, but I'm just gonna go right now. When I was doing national work for the Lutheran Church with 5 million members and 11,000 congregations in the 80s and 90s, police reform, violence against each other, violence against the earth, violence of police towards persons, particularly in the BIPOC community and those with emotional mental health challenges was vital, and that was back then. And so when I came to Portland, the first group I joined actually was the Albino Ministerial Alliance, because I know the history of the Black church in the city and state and the Northwest is always one of action. You don't always find that in other churches, but I wanted to be where people were moving for justice, and this certainly is one of those cases. I've been on the steering committee since it began, since Dr. Haynes called us together quite a while ago. It seemed like yesterday we were marching to remember Kendra James and to protest and crossing MLK on Skidmore and stopping by the freeway where the shooting happened. And then one time after the next chapter, we went to hearings and no one was prosecuted, no one was held accountable. And those are just the cases we know of the shootings. There have been other cases. Some I've got people I've talked to that weren't reported when someone was being treated in a violent way. And so this work is incredibly important. So a couple of things on accountability in particular. The city of Portland has to be held accountable ongoing. And I just want to underscore that. You're the commissions working on how this gets put together, but cities have histories of setting something up and then almost setting them up to fail because they don't have proper staffing. Those who become part of that don't get the support they need. PCEP would be a good example and its predecessor. And it's so important that the city be held accountable to provide the resources that are needed because we go through mayors regularly. I remember saying to Mayor Harrells, you may not be mayor in a couple of years. And he wasn't too happy about that, but he wasn't mayor. That's why we're saying the court had to stay engaged in this process. And so the court has been extremely important in the process, but so accountability by the city and then accountability not only for officers across the board, but accountability for leadership. We all know the culture of the Portland police and police departments across this country has to change. Built on systemic racism, white supremacy values that have been out there. You know, we don't have to go through that history, but we know you have to step back and look from the balcony or a little higher up and say, what's wrong? And how do we change systemically? So that's the accountability piece within the, I'd rather call them peacekeepers, change the names. What we're about. But within that too is the culture has to change, but so does the makeup. The diversity of the Portland Police Force has not changed in the last 15 years, 20 years. And I know a lot of officers who came on when Derek Fox was chief. And we've got to a point a few years ago, maybe 6 years ago, Dr. Haynes, where the city was working to try to show us diverse numbers. We kept asking. So they started counting people twice. So if you were a woman of color, you're counted twice as a woman and as a Black woman. So you had 2 boxes being filled, and the diversity numbers started going up, but they weren't real. So the accountability on that, saying we have to be staffing for the birth rate today in this nation, not waiting 20 years and changing the culture at the same time, because studies show that officers from the BIPOC community and LGBTQ officers maybe have a 14 or 15-year duration on the police force, whereas whites often completed for their full 30 years of retirement. Something's wrong with the culture when that's what happens to officers who are already on. So I'll stop there. I've got a lot more I could say, but Dr. Haynes really outlined it beautifully. I know Ashley Albies, we've been blessed to have the best legal team in federal court with Judge Simon. We've been blessed by Judge Simon. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, Department of Justice almost was ready to pull out. And then the albino Mr. Alliance kept them at the table because they were going to say things were almost in compliance. And of course, then George Floyd was murdered and everything changed because the Department of Justice wasn't using the racial lens. They were using the mental health lens, both incredibly important lenses. But it's like everybody woke up. But we were talking racial justice long time ago, and we called for them to come. And they didn't take that lens to begin with, but they certainly are now. So again, thank you for your work. I applaud you. Anything we can do to support you, just know we really, really value and honor each of you. Because it's hard work and it takes a real commitment of time and energy. And thank you.
Ashley. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. Thank you, Dr. Knudsen. And I echo the appreciation for all the work that folks in this committee are doing and participating. I have seen iterations of community oversight over the police over the years since I've been in Portland, since about 2002 or 2003. And I know that there's many different forms that we've had, and there's many people working on improving the culture of policing in Portland, and it takes a tremendous amount of effort, and it can't be done without strong community. And so I really also want to deeply appreciate the work that this committee and this community is doing. You know what, Dr. Haynes and Reverend Knudsen really covered the majority of the work of the AMAC. I represent the AMAC in the litigation with the Federal Department of Justice, and I also have had the privilege of representing families of people who have been killed by the Portland police, and am litigating some class action regarding Portland Police Bureau's use of force against protesters in 2020. And through those litigation processes, I do have the opportunity to review internal affairs investigations, police review board information, and much of that is confidential and subject to protective orders within the litigation. But some principles and patterns have certainly emerged in my review of that information. And of one of the most prominent themes that has stood out to me over time, over the many cases that I've worked on. In the review process, I do feel that there is a lack of a fundamental question of what could we have done differently to have a different outcome in a particular situation. I don't see that question being asked with any kind of seriousness, if it's asked at all. And we hear quite a bit from the city and the police bureau that it's a learning culture and one of adaptation. And I wish that had been and has been my impression, but it has not. I think the internal affairs investigations provide a tremendous amount of deference to the officers involved. I come away from many of those, reading those and reviewing those reports with more questions. And it is my hope that this community oversight board will take very seriously the recommendations or the concepts of independent investigation, having investigators that conduct investigations into officer involved shootings and deadly force cases that question the statements or the information being given by the witness officers or the involved officers that really do a searching inquiry to determine whether that statements or those version of events matches up with the physical evidence. I've had cases where the physical evidence is not does not match up with what the officer's testimony is. And I've regularly reviewed grand jury transcripts as well for various cases, and I come away with a lot more questions than, this is a district attorney issue, but this is why the AMAC has pushed for a special prosecutor, independent prosecutor, because without that direct relationship of continuing to rely on the police officers that the district attorneys might be prosecuting, there is more independence and transparency, and I think attention to detail in navigating the intricacies, and that applies to the investigations into the deadly force cases as well. Another piece is the Citizen Review Committee is not allowed to review, nor is the IPR allowed to review deadly force cases, and I think that's a tremendous deficiency in the current system. In a few years ago, Keaton Otis's father, Freddie Bryant, had tried to get the CRC to look at the shooting of his son. There were many questions that remained for many people in the community regarding Keaton Otis's death. And there was no avenue to pursue except for private litigation. And I think that's not fair and very restrictive. So I do think another deficiency is that the current system that we hope the new system will address is having broader community oversight over these investigations and examination of the information that's found from them, and integrating the family of the victims of police violence in that process. As part of the IPR process in non-deadly force cases, I've reviewed a lot of those as well. I know from reviewing many over the 2020 protest time that if an officer couldn't be identified by name or by badge number, many complaints were simply dismissed because the Bureau member couldn't be identified. And that's very troubling because there might have been a violation, but without, and for a certain amount of time, Portland Police Bureau officers were covering their ID numbers. So it was nearly impossible, and it continues to this day. I know some colleagues are attempting to litigate those cases where we can't identify officers. And again, I will say from my personal perspective, I would love to not have this job. I would love to not have people calling me looking for help with civil litigation. I want a system that takes care of this at the administrative level, that holds officers accountable for policy violations, for practice violations, and that puts the plaintiff's civil rights bar out of commission. I think all of us would love that, to not have to counsel family members and people who have lost loved ones or people who've been injured by the police, that there was a remedy within the system that could address the harm that they experienced. And the final thing I'll say is, I know that there are mediations when somebody files a complaint with the IPR. There's an opportunity for mediation for lower level non-force type of complaints. And I've only heard from one person that that's been a positive experience for the most part. I haven't heard from many of my clients that that's something that they feel compelled to participate in or had a good experience. That said, if people had a good experience, they might not end up calling me, right? People call me when they're pretty unhappy with their experience. So even recognizing that, I do think building in some kind of restorative process that allows people that have been harmed by police violence or police interactions to speak directly to the person that caused them harm, and for the officers to participate in a conversation and genuine conversation about how they could do better and be open to hearing and receptive to hearing. I think that would go a long way to improving community trust. So those are my general comments. I also, to follow up on Dr. Haynes' earlier comments, that it remains deeply troubling that the racial profiling statistics coming out of the Bureau are largely the same, and they have been for the past 20 years or so. And there's disproportionate stops, searches, and arrests of Black people and people of color. And everybody acknowledges that it's there, and yet we continue to see the same numbers year after year, the same harm continues to flow into our community. So with that, I appreciate again everybody's attention and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much. I would like us now to take questions and let the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition respond to them. Please keep your questions brief. Please allow me to facilitate this Q&A. And please ask questions that help the commission move towards identifying barriers to police accountability and best practices, which is the purpose of this phase of work. So thank you so much, Aimide. I am going to see who are panelists, who are persons who have raised their hands. Sophia, Commissioner Sophia, please. You can unmute. Yep.
Thank you so much. Dr. Haynes, Dr. Kunston, and I'm looking, and Ms. Ashley. I really appreciate you all's comments, and I wanted to make some comments, and maybe if you have feedback for my comments, I'd be love to hear it. Dr. Haynes, I so much appreciated your overview. It's really something that we all, I think, needed to hear and remember and see how extensive and how long this has been going on. I also really appreciated your comment about having our own legal team. I have been saying that from the very beginning, and we do plan to do that. That's in our plan of work. So I greatly appreciate that. Also, Ms. Ashley, you know, talking about I call it the after actions, you know, what could we have done to prevent that, you know, when something happens. That's something I brought up at one of our other commission meetings. I find it's extremely important for us to ask those questions after each and every incident for the change to occur, because if we don't do it when it occurs, it often gets forgotten. I had another comment that it just blew right through my head, but I will leave it at that right now since I can't remember and give someone else a chance. And oh, one more thing, that's what it was. Dr.
Newsom.
Yes, I love your idea to change the police to peacekeepers. Really, if there's a way we could change the name of that system, I think we will be ahead of the game, because sometimes naming something makes it so. And I appreciate that. And if there's a way we can do that, I am all for it. So thank you all very much.
We thank you for your comments, and I believe constantly that the historical context implicate the present as well as the future, and so in knowing that historical context is critically important, like the issue of the 48-hour rule. Well, since 2003, we have been trying to change that. The department will work maybe 2 weeks, a month before there's an initial interview of the officers. It was not until about less than 5 years ago that we finally made an agreement with the district attorney to bring that down into the 48-hour rule in less than 48 hours. But we felt that an investigator that's investigating the shooting incident or excessive force should have accessibility to the officer immediately on the scene and post-scene, and not have to wait 2 weeks or a month wait until they got their story together at Applebee's that used to be on 15th Street and saying the same thing and repeating the same thing. And so, but those actions like that of when do we interview officers, those are key part of the investigative process. Thank you. Mark.
I might add to that too, on the accountability side, because Dr. Haynes raises some really important pieces right there. We had 49 demands early on. And so we had the large vision of who we need to become, but those strategic demands, because you have to always have action to follow dreams or visions. You have to have and they have to be intentional, and people have to be held to them. The other thing is that on the training piece, how can you be a peacekeeper in this city and not know the history of Vanport? Now that's being taught now, finally. It took years. Or not know the history of Jefferson High School or Harriet Tubman or Portland and the historical nature of Northeast Portland. And you all know for years, when you heard a news story come on, it said a shooting in Northeast Portland. And that's how I didn't say a shooting in some, and there was this mentality. And when you have 75% of the officers, maybe 80% today, who live outside the city of Portland, there's something wrong with that picture because they're not woven into the community. And I don't know how we fix that, but that you have to be part of the community to be able to walk around it. To drive in as if you're going into some kind of zone. And we have somebody coming out of the military into the police force. There's something off. So the training has got to go deep on racial bias, on systemic racism, on the history of Portland, who we are, and a different version of seeing humanity. I mean, we are a beautiful human race. How do we take on the historical system of racism and also paint the vision of who we are and who we need to be and want to be? And that's the police force or the peacekeepers need to reflect that and honor it. It shouldn't be something, oh, I wish they were learning as children, many of them, but they've got to be taught.
Thank you so very much. I would like to invite Commissioner Debbie.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Debbie Iona, one of the commissioners, she, her. And I have a question. Commissioner Handelman earlier in this meeting mentioned that in the DOJ assessment, it was revealed that there are 7 officers had their cases overturned or reversed. And we also received a letter from a community member imploring us to find a way to design a system where when there was a determination of findings and discipline that it sticks. And so I'm just curious if you have any advice about specific things that we should include in the proposal that we're coming up with that makes it so that when this civilian board, community board with the civilian agency comes up with findings and discipline, that it doesn't get reversed.
I think critically key, and we did some of that with the initiative ballot proposal that in which 82% of the voters in favor of the independent oversight board. Okay, but we still need to do a little more work in the state legislature with reforming the arbitration system that allows officers 100% of the time to get off of excessive force and police deadly force against Black and brown and mentally ill persons. And so that lobbying effort is entitled, and we do have many friends on the state legislature level that are engaged on the process and want this model that we're creating in Portland to work, and so it can be duplicated across the state. But the goal is always to create a 21st century community policing. That is the vision. That is the vision where the police and the community are working together to solve the problems and the issues of the community. but it's going to require that some of these state laws also be changed.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Can I weigh in really briefly on that too?
Mhm.
Stemming from the 2010 shooting of Aaron Campbell, when Officer Ron Brashauer was disciplined and then reinstated per an arbitration decision, the AMAC filed an amicus brief with the Employment Relations Board in support of upholding that disciplinary action. And our argument there was that the public policy exception for the arbitration statute should take into account public safety from the viewpoint of the community by reinstating an officer who has taken a life in the way that Ron Brashauer did. And so I think thinking about that public policy exception, we know that it wasn't successful. The arbitrator didn't agree with the AMAC, but I think thinking about how we define public policy, thinking about how we define public safety, and being really clear and intentional that that includes how the community is impacted by an officer who is found to have violated policy being reinstated. There's a tremendous amount of deference to officer judgment, and it adopts this quote objectively reasonable standard, right? A officer in similar circumstances, and we know psychology has progressed quite a bit over many years to know that there's no such thing as completely objective. Everybody comes with bias. And so I think incorporating that reality of the lack of complete objectivity and a further definition and exploration of public policy and public safety to wide something that has always been in the back of my mind when thinking about the arbitration piece, because labor rights, as we know, are under attack in many facets. And I just want to be really intentional about not watering down. It's really hard to carve out exceptions, but I think that really being clear about how we define public policy, public safety, and those elements and those factors in how discipline is implemented by this body can go towards, my hope is that could go towards maintaining disciplinary action.
I'd just say one other comment to follow up on what Ashley and Dr. Haynes had to say. Accessibility is big. I just wanted to underscore that as you create this. For us, relationships are number one. So I hope the new commission has a chance to really build strong relationships. So often as adults, we spend days learning to trust each other instead of building relationships early on and then moving forward. But the other thing is the location. When you go downtown to City Hall, you've got the courthouses, you've got the federal courthouse, you've got the police department. There's a lot of intimidation for anybody to go and enter those kind of settings. And we declared Augustana a sanctuary church in '96 when I first got there because we were working closely with Latino leaders. And when people would not go to buildings of authority because they were afraid of deportation. So a church made sense. I'm not saying you choose a church to be located at, but finding a neutral site where citizens will feel safe, especially the most vulnerable citizens, to come in and file complaints or to work for change. Maybe at the old Washington High School Revolution Hall, maybe there's a place there, but I think creatively as you move forward, because if it's within the structure of city government, a lot of people are not going to, it's very intimidating to go and file or to go complain. And I think we have to be conscious of that concept. I know you all are. I'm looking at who's on this group. I know a lot of you, you're thinking all these things. But I just want to underscore how we create safe space, literally sanctuary, to help change what is.
Thank you so much, everyone. Commissioner CMOB, but I do want to state that we are allowed to go until 9:15 this evening. So I'm allowing this conversation to keep going and encourage us to continue to ask questions for a few more minutes. So Commissioner CMOB.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. And again, thank you, Dr. Haynes, Dr. Knudsen, and Attorney Albies. Just to kind of preface and acknowledge over here that AMA has been a consistent voice in appealing for changes to the IPR and police review systems for well over a decade and holding prescient warnings over the urgency of these improvements. AMA has tracked the city's changes and evolution of the city's independent oversight system and have been a force in the voice to compel officer testimony and have IPR conduct its own investigations over IA. AMA has also warned in your priority lists that the IPR could end up in a scenario in which the IPR will one day ask a question and the Bureau will fail to cooperate. With that being said, what are your key recommendations in creating this power for our IPR board?
Well, basically, I think a foundation has been laid, but I think the where work will have to be done is that we're going to need, as I said previously, more changes in the state legislature to mediate the power of the board, and then we're going to have also in term a mediation in the contract with PPA, okay, and which means that we're going to have to make sure that these city commissioners continue to advocate for the board to have that kind of independence and to be able to do its job and do it effectively and efficiently. But I think the beginning of the work, my brother, is of having a board that jails, that because we have in the history of the predecessor of PCEP and others that we have found out that when there's not proper training and there's not a relationship built on the board, that sometimes things can fall apart internally. Now, there can always be external pressures that take place, but it's very important to come up and having the right procedures and the right protocols and the right vision and direction of the board that encompass the stated legal mission of the board, but also in terms of building the relationship of the internally of the board. I think if the board internally is strong and develop connection with a community, the community is going to be your advocate for getting what you need to be done. You want to add to that?
Attorney Always, please go if you wish. I'll follow.
Simaba, I'm sorry, can you repeat the tail end of your question? I just want to make sure that I'm actually answering the question that you asked.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's a weighty and lofty one, but with the history, like we honestly wouldn't be here today. None of us would be commissioners over here today for this if it weren't for the history that the AMA has dedicated in to get us here and have steered us here. And it's been well documented. So my question was that, in the AMA's priority lists that that you guys have warned in your priority list that the IPR could end up in a scenario in which the IPR will one day ask a question and the Bureau will fail to cooperate when it comes to being able to, compel officer testimony and have IPR conduct its own investigations, which is a power that we look to hopefully create. So what are your key recommendations in creating this power for our IPR board?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I agree 100% with Dr. Haynes that there should be some and needs to be some changes, I think, at the state level, right? Because it's the collective bargaining agreement that blocks IPR from asking those questions and compelling an answer. And while AMAC respects the right to bargain over the terms and conditions of employment when it comes to public safety, and it comes to thorough and effective investigations of officer misconduct, police officer misconduct, I think there's that category of the compelling of those statements must happen, because the workaround that we have within the city right now is just that, a workaround, and it feels very fragile. And so I agree that there has to be a tweak. I think that a tweak at the state level that will require and allow and authorize, or the PPA could agree to it, which I think is unlikely. But I think, I personally kind of take a harder stance, but unfortunately, I'm not sure the courts agree with me, that when it comes to public safety and public policy, mandating a response to an independent investigation into a deadly force incident, to me, that is the epitome of a public policy issue. But I think that the way that arbitrators interpret that is different than the AMAC's interpretation. So I do think a tweak at the state level will clarify that issue.
I would just add, again, when Dr. Haynes spoke of relationships, that's going to be core to an effective group. The community is who you're accountable to, and that's going to be so important going forward. And the community is a powerful, powerful voice for change. And we've always advocated there have to be input in forums, not just putting a notice out, but letting people know well in advance. Demand. There's got to be power in this to make demands for change, and not to be worried about. But I know people will be with you on those demands. And again, in the day-to-day work, your staffing will be vital, and the staffing that is chosen has to be those that work for what's being accomplished and have that commitment to it. And finally, within the day-to-day work of accountability will be vision. And I think for many sectors, we need to hold up a vision of the 21st century model and of peacekeeping that keeps pulling us into a future, and change is what is. So those will be just a few suggestions. Good question always.
Thank you so much. So Commissioner Dan, we're running.
Oh, good evening,
Commissioner Dan, we're running short on time.
I understand. I'm going to be very short. In the interest of full disclosure, I am a member of the AMA Coalition Steering Committee, and so I've been shoulder to shoulder with these folks for roughly 20 years, as Dr. Haynes said. So I have been being very quiet up on that because I have a conflict in a way, but I can ask a question still, and I don't mean to push you on the spot. But next week we're having the Police Association come in. You all mentioned the Police Association. Do you have a question that you'd like the commission to ask to the Police Association when they're here next week?
I think there are a couple of questions that are there that I would ask, and with the association is when will we have a case that the association would support the public when an unarmed citizen is killed by a police officer, and it's very clear that the policy and the training and everything else has been broken. Will there always still continue to be 100% type of support, whether right or wrong in that, Second question that I ask is that in terms of the willingness to change the culture, to be a change agent and supporting the culture within the Bureau itself of we against them. I think if we had some internal advocacy within PPA, the community can move towards that 21st community policing vision. And we can put a halt to the growing crime rate. We could have put a halt to the growing gun violence in our community. And we can create a new beginning of trust.
I think I would, of course, concur with everything I just heard. I think asking them what their understanding of constitutional policing is from their perspective. Ask them, how do you overcome the past in policing of systemic racism? Let them articulate that. How do they see changing the culture and changing the makeup of the police? I mean, some of the same questions, we were all talking about, I put it right to them and hear from them. And that could be very telling on where they're coming from or what they want to say. How can they be part of the solution to what is? What would they see steps they would take for accountability and for training? So just I think those rhetorical questions, come back to them and let them speak and answer them for you. I think that's a really great question to ask, what questions to ask, because that's the good Socratic method, right? So.
Wow, thank you so very much for this thoughtful discussion. I would now like to take public comment on the issues discussed in the briefing. We ask members of the public to keep their comments on the briefing or questions to the briefers to 2 minutes in length at most, and raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. So I see a question in the Q&A and would like to invite the person who put the question into the Q&A speak this into the public comment if they so choose. Pamela Fitzsimmons, or any other person who are participants, you're welcome to raise your hand and to comment. Okay, seeing none, then I would like to move on to going toward our one thing that we need to do.
If I can interrupt real quick, and Dr. Moses,
yep.
I would like to read Pamela Fitzsimmons' question into record for Reverend Knutson. I think it is an interesting one, and I think Reverend Knutson would have a wonderful answer for this.
Be my guest. Yes, please.
Pamela Fitzsimmons asks questions for Rev Knutson. You want to change police culture. When will the criminal culture change? The people who rob, assault, steal, kill, when will their culture change? And second, since when did George Floyd ever visit Portland? If you blame Portland police for his death, you are engaging in his profiling. It's not a question too dissimilar from what a lot of Portlanders think. Not a whole lot, but there are those out there. I'd love to hear an answer for that from Reverend Knutson.
Certainly, and I appreciate the questions because I always like dialogue. And even if we disagree on answers, I love dialogue. That's part of being in a community. In terms of the George Floyd reference, that opened the eyes of the DOJ to what was happening around the country. That's not an isolated case. So when we talk about Aaron Campbell, being shot in crisis, coming out because his brother died and he's shot by a sniper, that didn't get national attention, but that was equally. Keaton Otis, 23 shots fired into a car. My son's an African-American male at 30 years old. We have a Camry, and he would have been about the same age as Keaton today. that was just another example where nothing was taken, no action was taken. So George Floyd amplified what was going on around this nation and opened eyes, I hope, to many, many people. Secondly, in terms of violence from others, if we are in positions of authority, when I put on a robe to lead Sunday worship, I better know that people see something in that robe. Not that I want to see that in myself, but I have to know that robe symbolizes something. You put on a police uniform with a badge and a gun and a taser, you are symbolizing incredible authority. And for those in authority, it's incumbent that they reflect peaceable actions, that they reflect what it means to weave community. We aren't going to change others unless we change our systems as well. So I just been very strong about that. We are given an authority, a job, and an income. You need to live up to those standards of accountability and of peaceful policing or peacekeeping. Others, when they see things change, I watch people change, but I also know there's much deeper issues in this city and state of equity, of income, of accessibility, of being denied because of race. No, we have a large thing to take on as a society to overcome America's greatest sin, which is racism. And if we don't open our eyes to that, so I just want to say there's deeper issues in terms of some of the things that are happening in the cities that need to be addressed. And I come out of a youth perspective. I've worked with young people. I've seen young people at 16 who are in trouble, who are now working for Comcast because they had an opportunity, a chance, and somebody walked with them, and the city or system started to work for them. So we have a responsibility to society, but if you're an authority, you have even more responsibility. I can't say that enough. I hope that's helpful.
And I just would like to add to Dr. Knudsen. There's a difference between the criminal element and a police officer that represents the government, that represents the city, that's given the authority that nobody else is given, but in their own services and war. And that's the ability to take another person's life. You know, criminals are illegal people. They are illegally doing, which is contrary to the law. The police department are government paid officials that we pay with our tax dollars, that have an ethical core, that have a legal core, that represent the Constitution. And so just like we hold all other officials accountable, we also hold police accountable, just like we hold citizens accountable for murdering each other. We should hold police officers accountable for murdering citizens. You know, the culture, as a longtime civil rights leader that marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, I remember the time that we had to change the culture of just having Black personnel on the police. It was illegal in many of our states, including Portland, for a Black officer to arrest a white man, okay? It was illegal for them to even become a police officer. We're talking about something that just happened in the 40s that fit this, you know, but the culture had to be transformed. The culture had to be changed. To have not only Black and brown police officers, but also to have women and LGBT police officers, you know, the culture had to change. That's why the culture had to change. It's the difference between apples and oranges.
Wow. I just want to thank our presenters. Your wisdom, your passion, your compassion, and your determination to birth what can happen here is deeply appreciated by all of us. And so we thank you for your time, for your expertise, and thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Dr. Moses, thank you so much.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. And also just a reminder for folks that on next Wednesday is the status hearing for the DOJ Department of Justice litigation. AMAC will be there, MHA will be there, PSAP folks will be there, the city will be there, Department of Justice will be there. So I think it's an important community event.
I'd like to invoke the name of our dear colleague, Dr. T. Allen Bethel, one of the greats. He and Dr. Haynes have been leading us, and he's part of that host of saints now, but he always said in everything we did, we want everybody to go home at night safe. That includes people in the community, that includes the police, and like any profession, if someone's out of line, you got to be accountable. That's true in my profession as well. And so the spirit is one of community. It's not one of dividing. It's one of how do people go home safe, and we do it well together.
Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. Really deeply appreciate this conversation.
Dr. Moses, bless you. Thank you.
Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners.
So commission members, I'm going to ask if we can do some business before we come back to a brief discussion. We're going to now move into a discussion of the community engagements subcommittee co-chairs for the fact-finding phase. Commissioners Tirsa and Connie were approved by the full commission on June 6th as co-chairs. Commissioner Connie has stepped down as a co-chair, but remains on the subcommittee and the commission as a member. Today, the PAC will approve a new co-chair under the internal processes document approved by the membership on May 19th. Each subcommittee has 2 chairs who serve for roughly one phase of work, or about 90 days. These subcommittee co-chairs have a list of tasks similar to, but shorter than, the full commission co-chairs, and will be supported by co-chair Tirsa, as well as the full commission co-chairs CMOB, Lovisa, and Faith during this phase. The full commission approves subcommittee co-chairs. At present, there is one candidate for one position as co-chair of the subcommittee on community engagement events, Commissioner Christian. Before we move into discussion of who should be co-chair, are there any questions on the process at this time? Seeing none, I would like to invite the co-chairs to speak on this matter. Commissioner Faith.
With no questions or discussions, I would like to nominate Commissioner Christian to be one of the co-chairs of the Community Engagement Subcommittee, and welcome you and thank you for being willing.
So there's a proposal to appoint Commissioner Christian to join Commissioner Tirsa as a co-chair on the subcommittee on community engagement events. Is there strong opposition to this proposal? I'm going to leave that question hanging right there. Is there strong opposition? Is there agreement to these members as co-chairs? I see jazz hands. Lots of thumbs up. Welcome, Commissioner Christian. Okay, so we now have our co-chairs for the Community Engagement Events Subcommittee. We have about 3 minutes left. Would love to go back to the agreements, to the barriers and best practices conversation regarding our last presentation. And I would like to take that conversation and facilitate that conversation for you. Any comments? I see Commissioner Sophia, please.
I just wanted to reiterate some of the best practices. Some of them we've mentioned already. And one that we mentioned without a lot of discussion which is the mediation. I know it's come up before. I know the Ms. Ashley had mentioned some mixed results for that. And I think it would be a best practices. I don't know exactly how to institute it, but she made a lot of really good points about the victims being able to go into conversation with the police. And I think we need to really consider that as part of our transparency and community building.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Angie, and then Commissioner Faith will be our last person on this topic.
Thank you. I'll be really quick. I just wanted to reiterate that I was very happy to hear that that it was mentioned the relationship between the actual commissioners. I think that you know, really the relationship of the actual, I'm not commissioners, oversight committee members is going to be something that will influence how successful they can be. And I am really happy to hear somebody mention that tonight. So I wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Angie. Commissioner Faith.
Yeah, I think tonight we talked a lot around state level change and policy change. I was excited to hear that. And another component that Dr. Haynes brought up that we haven't spoken to a lot was around the culture of us versus them. That was really resonated with me, and yeah, I wanted to call that out.
Thank you so very much. Now I would like to go to public comment on the issues the PAC is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We will ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. I do not see any people raising their hands for public comment. So I would like to move to the garden plot recap. This is a time to summarize any items already brought up today, which didn't fit into today's agenda. We'll recap those items here and use them in developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss them, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so these items can be addressed. I would like to invite Ayamide or staff to be able to come into this to note the garden plot.
One of the things that I heard was a possible follow-up with the DA as a garden plot, and maybe what laws, investigating what laws prevent the commission from doing their job. Those are the two major things that I got.
I got those too. Thank you so much, Ayamide. And then I see Catherine has put in a comment. I think it would be good to have additional debrief and discussion on the AMAC presentation at our next meeting. It was a rich presentation and there's more to discuss. Thank you. And Mr. Handelman says, I don't think we had a briefing with the US DOJ on our calendar yet. Two things that were briefly talked about this evening that could go into our garden plot. Staff, are there any additions?
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, then we will close our meeting this evening. I want to thank all of you who attended today's meeting and for your contributions. Thank you also to the interpreters supporting access to the meeting of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you to our briefers for coming and spending your time, sharing your thoughts with the commission and the public. Finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. You can give advance public comment prior to the future meetings at tinyurl.com/Portland PAC comment. You can sign up for email updates on the PAC's work at tinyurl.com/Portland PAC updates. It is now 9:19 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.